Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Hack Shack. Today we're going to be making a coffee table. So I bought this second-hand coffee machine on Facebook Marketplace, but currently I don't have a coffee table. So before we start with the build, let's see if this thing works. Oh, free coffee, very nice. You choke a dozen donkeys on that. That's a cup of coffee.
So I want the coffee table to have a lower shelf so I can hide a load of junk, and I also want the legs to be hollow so I can run power in it for a charging station. Now I've been burned before with the measurements on wood that I've bought, so I just wanted to double check the actual dimensions just to make sure that it was a tight fit. This is supposed to be 108mm, but it just depends on the thicknesses of the other timber. To my surprise and delight, it actually checks out. I thought it'd be worth getting these as true and even as I could before starting the glue up, because try as I might, I can never quite get the miter saw to be perfectly 90 degrees. I'm using simple glue and screw on the legs, mainly because this is going to be painted, so there's no need for any fancy joinery. I do want to be able to take the table apart for reasons that will become clear, so I've devised this kind of locking mechanism with the legs and the shelf. Now comes the fun part. I've always wanted a coffee table that actually makes coffee, otherwise it's just a table. So I need to find a way to integrate the coffee machine into the table itself. I couldn't find any schematics of the machine online no matter how hard I tried, so I had to draw up the machine myself in Illustrator. So as you can see here, the machine base is actually thicker than this sheet of ply, so I'm going to have to double up on the lower shelf. And also it makes it look a bit nicer because it's a bit thicker. Just giving everything a little round over edge with the router bit, and then just ensuring all the screws are filled and flush, ready for sand and paint. So here I'm using the Mi NC to route out the lower portion of that shelf, just so that the coffee machine sits flush with the top. Perfect. And this will stop any rocking cups or anything like that from spilling over. Laminating the two sheets together gives a nice thickness, and I'll do the same for the top as well. Although it's not the most overly designed piece of furniture, I did want the proportions to be right, so I just worked out the overhang based on the sides versus the front and back. Now this is the trickiest part of the build, making sure that the hole in the top aligned with the underneath so that the coffee machine fit perfectly and the sliding mechanism would work. In hindsight, this bit didn't have to be as neat as this because you don't actually see it from the top. It's only from underneath that it fits perfectly around the machine. Now just remember that as coffee can actually dehydrate you, make sure that you stay hydrated. So here's what I mean, it doesn't actually have to be this snug a fit because there's another piece going on top anyway, so it didn't really matter. I've made these pegs to help align the top of the table to the legs, and it also helps tie everything together. Whereas the cutout you see now doesn't have to be that accurate, the bit I'm doing next really does because it's the opening for the coffee pods and for the water container. So I made sure that I worked backwards from this point and gave myself some leeway that I could trim off the edges of the table. I used plywood instead of MDF because I was a little bit worried about the moisture from the coffee machine, but it was full of void, so I made sure I had to fill all the edges of the ply before sanding. I gave this 3 coats of primer with sanding in between just to make sure there's a nice smooth finish. I wanted to see the different textures from a roller versus a brush, so I tested with the roller first on the underneath of the top. And then when I used the brush on the lower shelf here, it came out way too smooth and shiny, so I much prefer the roller finish. And then finished with a couple of coats of satin polyurethane. Because the top of the coffee machine is now enclosed, I've just installed this steam vent to ensure there's enough ventilation. It can still come out the sides and the back, but I just want to be sure. We all know it's not a coffee table these days without a bit of epoxy. And I was getting withdrawal symptoms from the angle grinder, so it's an excuse to use that. And then these are the alignment pegs ready for final assembly. Now, because there was no instructions or schematics of this machine online anywhere, I had absolutely no idea what to expect when opening it up. I wanted to take it apart so I could reroute some of the mechanics and move some of the systems around inside the table, but actually it proved to be way more over-engineered and complicated than it needed to be. There were like safety mechanisms everywhere, so there were like optical sensors. So every time you opened something or moved something, like a physical thing inside the machine moved and crossed the sensor, so there's no way I could relocate those inside the table. And that included things like the sliding mechanism at the top for the capsules. There was actually a sensor that detected when a capsule drops down. And luckily the guy I bought it off told me that there's even a sensor in the tray for the empty capsules. So if you remove that, the machine doesn't work. So what I actually ended up doing was rerouting the controls to the front panel so I could have these on the outside of the table and not have to worry about reaching underneath to change the settings. Again, this is super complicated. There was 3 separate ribbon cables running to the control panel, one of which was an optical sensor from the lid, so that wouldn't operate unless I rerouted that. And I just had to make sure that everything was shrink wrapped because I didn't want any steam getting into the circuitry. Now it goes without saying there's like quite high pressure water here and high powered electricity, so if you don't know what you're doing, please don't take apart your coffee machine at home. Especially if you're anything like me, when you take something apart and you put it back together, there's always one screw left over. So these are the main controls of the machine. One is a dial that selects the water temperature, and the other is one that selects what kind of coffee you want, from espresso all the way up to Americano or just plain hot water. So I want these on the front of the table, so I'm going to cut out a recess in the front leg. Now, as the case of the coffee machine itself is actually just really thin plastic, I've got to route out this leg to the same thickness as that, which is about 2 or 3 mil. Hopefully this black plastic panel will give some protection from any drips or anything. I mean, this circuitry is only low voltage, but I just don't want it to break. Then it's just a case of push fitting the dials back on and then putting the illuminated faceplates in. I'm actually really impressed with the features and the quality of this machine, and considering I picked it up for only $70 off Facebook Marketplace, I think it was a bargain. Now there's no point going to all this effort to just have a cable running across the floor, so I'm going to route it underneath this nice thick rug. And I'm going to hook this up via a smart plug because I want to be able to turn the table on and off, and also it's going to be running a charging station for things like mobile phones and PlayStation controllers. Alexa, turn on the coffee table. Now my favourite thing about this coffee machine has got to be the Bluetooth feature. So you can actually set this up on your phone to, say, make you a cup of coffee first thing in the morning. It's you fucking beauty.
Sounds good.
Now I've got to say, capsule coffee is by no means a replacement for real coffee, but this is a nice neat solution with very little mess, and I can have coffee on demand.
Hey Bruce, what's the name of that YouTube channel you like with all the goofy shit all over the walls?
Oh, check!
Nah mate, it's not for you. You stick to your French press.